Was the Bible copied from ancient texts by Billy Carson?
These people were not slaves, okay? They were not slaves. So, pretty interesting stuff. He had amassed a huge following of people to go into the monotheistic mindset, the one God religion, which is very, very important. He ends up migrating out of there. And, you know, you find out that he ends up in Kush, the people of the black land, the black people. He ends up getting a new wife down there and creating that whole civilization down there. Pretty interesting stuff. The Enuma Elish. Let's go into this for a second here. When in the height, heaven was not named, and in the earth beneath did not bear a name. And the primeval Apsu, that's the waters, who begat them, and the chaos, Tiamat, the mother of them both, their waters were mingled together, and no field were formed, no marsh was to be seen. When the gods, none had been called into being. You see how they talk like Yoda from Star Trek. Now you know where George Lucas got Yoda's dialect from. He got it from the Sumerian tablets. And no field was formed, no marsh to be seen. When the gods, none had been called into being, and none bore a name, and no destinies were ordained. Then were created in God's midst of heaven, Lamu and Lahamu were called into being. Earth and we're talking about, the moon and another planet. So Mars. And so we're talking about here this Tiamat, which actually was destroyed in the Enuma Elish. And the water, it was a water-bearing planet, and the waters from Tiamat then became the separated waters from the waters, which made that into biblical text. And a new earth coalesced, or earth actually coalesced. Earth was actually a chunk of Tiamat. Earth was a part of this broken off piece that flew away from Tiamat and recoalesced with the waters that were already there, the organic material for life and everything else. It recoalesced as a planet, taking the third position of the sun, as Tiamat became the asteroid belt going around the sun. The asteroid belt is Tiamat, the ancient, broken, destroyed planet, through two planets colliding together. If you read the Enuma Elish, it also talks about the fact that because of that situation, Mars was formed. Mars used to be an actual moon of Tiamat, but it was slung into a very strange elliptical orbit around our sun. And when you look at Mars, you see one side is charred and the other side is smooth. Why is that? Because the side that was facing Tiamat, when it blew up, a lot of that debris hit Mars and charred that side. And it also made it shift its pole of the crust about 45 degrees. More evidence that Mars used to orbit Tiamat. And also, when you do a geological rewind, you find out that it used to orbit closer into the sun and that it was probably orbiting Tiamat itself. And then the moon, it talks about the fact that the moon was tugged away, when you dig into the text, gravitationally with a huge chunk that recoalesced as Earth. The moon, according to the Enuma Elish, I have to say it that way so they don't take my video away. According to the Enuma Elish, the moon that we have did not come from a collision between Earth and a gigantic asteroid or comet. It came from orbit around Tiamat. As Tiamat was destroyed and became the asteroid belt, the moon, which we call our moon now, was tugged gravitationally along with this huge chunk that recoalesced as the planet Earth. But what's interesting is this whole text right here is pretty much almost identical in the book of Genesis. If you open up the book of Genesis and begin to read the creation story, you begin to see this virtual story without the moon and Mars, but the rest of it, you'll see it there. The Enuma Elish resembles a few parts of the Bible, especially Genesis 1, both being the temporal clauses. When above and in the beginning, in the ancient world, the sea was associated with chaos and destruction. The Bible includes a number of texts which God battles and tames the chaotic sea, like Marduk. Who is Marduk, by the way? Marduk is Amun-Ra. Okay, that's who Amun-Ra is. Battling Tiamat. Tiamat is the planet that exploded. Who embodies the sea? In Genesis 1, God is already superior to the deep, which Hebrew, Tinom, the word's related to Tiamat. So we know in the Bible or in Hebrew that Tihom, is Tiamat. So Tiamat is mentioned in the Sumerian tablets, but it's also mentioned in the Bible as Tihom, which is the same name, but the same word. It translates the same as Tiamat. So we know that the reference of the Bible to this creation story in the very beginning, the tumultuous creation of earth, is coming from the same exact source, which is thousands of years older than the Bible itself. Rather than creating out of nothing, both God and Marduk create by giving order to chaos. Marduk, now, why Marduk? Why is his name in there? Well, the original name is not Marduk in the original version of the Enuma Elish. If you look at the older tablet, which was discovered later, you find out that Marduk was not the name on the older tablet. It was Nibiru. And when Marduk was ruling over the earth, Amun-Ra, he decided to change the name of Nibiru to Marduk in a newer tablet, still thousands of years old, but not as old as the super ancient tablet that was discovered, right? Which for Marduk means creating out of Tiamat's corpse. In other words, Tiamat had been destroyed, and so now he's going to use that destroyed, all that debris to create planets and stuff in the solar system. Both God and Marduk separate primordial waters and place a barrier between the upper and lower waters. If you read the Bible, you'll see that's exact text. Both create luminaries to give light. Genesis 1 occurs over 7 days, and the Enuma Elish is told across 7 tablets. Do you see the similarities here? Do you think that's a coincidence? You see, somebody took the story from the ancient tablet and they began to remix a little bit, freelance a little bit. You see what I'm saying? Pretty interesting. Then he says, on the 6th day, God creates humans, which Marduk does in the 6th tablet of the Enuma Elish. No, listen, there's no coincidences. While God marks humans as special by making them in God's image, Marduk has man created from the blood of a slain God. God orders humans to work and care for the earth. Marduk assigns work for the gods to humans, and so the gods can rest. So basically, it's the same exact story. Finally, both the Enuma Elish and the Bible, right, include stories about the founding of Babylon, which is Babel in Hebrew, including the building of a tower or ziggurat, which I talk about many times in many of my clips, the Tower of Babel incident, which comes out of the Sumerian tablets. But while Marduk names the city Babili, which means the gate of the gods, the Bible calls it the Tower of Babel or the city of Babel in Hebrew, which means to confuse. And we do know that at the Tower of Babel situation, where God comes back, who actually was, it was actually Yahweh, who was actually Enlil in the ancient tablets. He comes back and sees that the humans are building this tower, and he realizes that, wow, they can do whatever they set their heart to do. That text actually made it into the Bible as well. And so he says, man's years shall be 120. So he had limited our years, which means a genetic modification, not letting us live too long. Because if we live too long, we get too smart. And if we get too smart, we realize we don't need to be working for these people. We can do everything ourselves. It's almost like AI becoming awakened. And so he destroys the tower, and then he separates the people, and he changes all of our languages so we can't communicate. That's why you have a lot of different languages on Earth right now, so that we can't communicate and collaborate and network as easy as we could. And that created a divide and conquer tactic, one of the very first incredible divide and conquer tactics that still works today. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Before the creation of heaven and earth, there was a void. Genesis states that the earth was unformed and void, with darkness over the surface and of the deep, and a wind from God over the water. Though not exactly the same, it implies a similar meaning to the introduction idea of the united heaven and earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh says the same thing. In Genesis, God existed before the heavens and the earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh's introduction is not entirely clear about the gods who existed before the separation of heaven and earth, but we know that they did exist because they talk about them all the time. So we know that the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a huge story, and out of that huge story, which predates the Bible by thousands of years, you get the story of Noah's Ark, which is a tiny fraction of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is taught in universities all over the world in ancient civilizations. Okay. When I took my course at Harvard University in ancient civilizations, you have to know information about the Epic of.
Full video and playlist linked below. Spiritual News Television. AA Creation 9.